The history of Korea women's movement dates back to the Japanese colonial era. In 1919, most anti-Japanese women's organizations were active immediately after the March 1st movement and were disbanded by Japanese oppression. Since then, the women's movement has been developing into educational movements, national economic promotion movements, religious movements, and enlightenment movements to improve lives. The women's movement was divided into nationalist and socialist after the formation of the Chosen Women's Association in 1924 under the influence of socialist ideas. In February 1927, a news conference was organized to promote divided national and international anti-Japanese national movements into a stronger form. In order to unify the theory of women's movement, Kunuhe was formed in the May of that year. This was very significant because Kunuhe was one of the earliest forms of female political activism. The purpose of the founding was to unfold the women's movement in the past. Since there was no unified organization and there was no unified goal or leadership spirit, the movement did not have enough effect. So, through the Kunuhe, women's capabilities were solidly united to develop a new women's movement. The code was a solid consolidation of women and improved status. The goal of the movement was two directions. The first being the liberation of the woman herself from the feudal bridle and the liberation from Japanese aggression. It was in the early 1980s that the women's movement began to take hold. The Korean Women's Call, which is considered to be a pioneering women's movement, was also established in this period 1983. The appearance of various women's groups continued in 1987 as the Korea Women's Association was established in the year. They felt the need for a national organization that can garner public support and exercise collective influence. It was in 1991 to 1992 that the fire in the anti-violence movement began. In 1991, Kim Bu-nam murdered his neighbor uncle Song Baek-won, who raped himself when he was 9 years old. It was after learning that the innocence and the expiration of the statute of limitations cannot be legally punished. In 1992, a college student killed his stepfather with his boyfriend. He was sexually assaulted by his stepfather for 13 years. In the mid-1990s, the movement began to abolish the policy that grants privileges to men who have completed their military service. Women's groups have argued that this was a matter of equality that the entire civil society should pay attention to. As a result, in 1999, the Constitutional Court ruled that the system violated the Constitution, and ultimately the policy was abolished. As a result of the anti-violence movement, the Special Act on Sexual Violence was enacted in 1994, and the Women's Special Committee was established in 1998. The recent efforts to improve women's rights and protect women from sexual abuses have shed light on the past war atrocities, such as the sex crimes committed by the Japanese against the comfort woman from Korea. The War and Women's Human Rights Museum, located in Mapogu, Korea, is a space to remember and educate the history of the survivors of the Japanese sex atrocities, and to work to solve the Japanese comfort woman problem. Here, visitors are able to learn the stories of the comfort women and educate themselves about the truth behind Japanese war atrocities. In the History Hall of the museum, the exhibition of Japanese military documents and related materials that can reveal the truth of the Japanese comfort woman problem is displayed. It shows the reality of the comfort woman system as a national crime organized and systematically organized by the Japanese military, and that it is possible to examine the suffering and post-war situations of victims at the comfort station. In the sports officer part of the gallery, one can see exhibits and videos and review the records of legal struggles and international activities through the exhibitions. And one can also experience the scene of the demand demonstrations that are still going on and meet the peace ritual built on the peace path in front of the Japanese embassy. Along with a panel that introduces the record of damages such as the period and the area of performance in the Life Hall 1, objects and artifacts from victims' hands are displayed. You can use the touch screen to take a closer look at the records of victims' lives, such as photos and newspaper articles. On the donors wall, you can see the list of supporters who served as the cornerstones until the war and the Women's Human Rights Museum was built, and the list is engraved on the center wall of the second floor. In the memorial hall, one can see that the wall is filled with bricks and the name of victims who have failed to leave their names and faces. Anyone can personally make a wreath and can freely donate a tribute for the next visitor's wreath. On the permanent hall on the first floor, the stories of women in the world suffering from the war today are exhibited through various examples and photos, and you can look at the tragedy of the war flowing through the wall video as if watching a music video. It is a multi-purpose space that is used as a seminar space outside of the viewing time together with the planning exhibition hall. As Korea still remains to be a highly male-oriented society, it is very important for feminists to continue the past legacy of feminist movements in Korea and be active in advancing women's rights. Nowadays, Korea's feminist movement seems to primarily revolve around the legal protection of women against sex crimes. For example, the Me Too movement that happened a few years ago represents how prevalent sex crimes are and how lacking legal justice for women victims is. Feminists are now taking active measures to make a voice in public, coming out to streets for protests instead of simply speaking through online platforms. The Korean Me Too movement began on January 29, 2018 by the Korean prosecutor Seo Ji-yeon. She appeared in the JTBC newsroom and accused An Tae-geun, who works in the prosecution, of sexual violence and abuse. Subsequently, as the drama director Yoon Taek Lee was exposed through SNS, a string of accusations of sexual violence committed by authorities started in South Korea, including the poet Koeun, dramatist Oh Tae-seok, Lee Yoon-taek, actress Cho Min-gi, actor Jo Se-yeon, political personal An Hee-jung. 20 authorities have been cited as perpetrators. On February 26, 2018, President Moon Jae-in announced his intention to pay tribute to the courage of victims who have exposed the damage and to support the Me Too movement. If the victims are exposed, he said, we will confirm the intention of criminal charges and the incident after June 2013 when the prosecution was abolished. Although the experience of being victimized by a sex offender is usually something that women do not tend to disclose, fearing retaliation from the offender and public humiliation, the Me Too movement encouraged many female victims to stand up with courage and publicly accuse the perpetrators. It is true that recent feminist movements were directed towards a positive change in the society. However, the main reason why we need to learn the past feminist movements is because some parts of the modern Korean feminist movement are deviating from the movement's original purpose, appearing in forms of misandry. Although most feminists are fighting for gender equality, these few feminists are making feminism appear like a radical movement in Korea, causing public misogyny among men. It is important for the modern feminists to learn the history of Korea's feminist movement and have a thorough understanding about the movement nature and what it's trying to achieve.